when we're teaching, the only question, they'll ask me a question and my response always is, where was the ball? Because all of their positioning is just based on where the ball is. And so here's your primary, and then you only have usually one other cover that you have to worry about. And from a teaching standpoint, that's where I think we are often at our best. And we have tried, we have 5 zone offenses, but really what we've tried to do is just mimic what we will see. And so that just eliminates scouts again. Hey, this is how we're gonna spread us out. This is how we're gonna set a ball screen and overload it. And so we've tried to make sure on offense we do the things that are hard to guard now. And so those are just some of the things that I've learned over time. And now we're pretty good at some of the things that we used to really cause us problems.
Hey, welcome to another Coaching You podcast with the coach, Brendan Suhr, presented by Noah Basketball. Today, we've had some pretty darn good guests over the years, but I might say this could be possibly the smartest guest we've ever had. We are talking about a Ph.D. coach that understands the analytics, the science, an expert in leadership. Oh, by the way, I'm not sure we've ever had a coach with the record that she has. Juli Fulks, the head coach of Marshall University, when she was at Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky, let me tell you, coming out of COVID, first of all, at Transylvania over 10 years, 242 wins, 39 losses. Not bad. But coming out of our COVID pandemic shutdown, here's what her teams did. They were 33-0 in 2023, the Division III national champion. But over a 3-year span, her teams went 91-2. 91-2. Oh, by the way, they also had a 64-game winning streak, the third longest in Division III history. She had the winningest team in Division I, II, or III, men's or women's during that span. She is an incredible coach. She's spoken at clinics we've had, but I'll tell you what makes Juli so special. Her ability to teach. She runs as good a zone defense as I've ever seen, men's or women's. I'm telling you, you study Juli Fulks, and you study what she's done at Transylvania and what she's now doing at Marshall, and you will see an absolute star. I'm so excited because you will find out this incredible woman gave us an amazing time of learning and teaching and conversation. After this quick time out from our sponsors, you're going to come back and really enjoy talking to Juli. Noah Basketball is our new presenting sponsor of our Coaching You podcast. Noah Basketball is a shot tracking and data company that has helped change how coaches and players perfect the game's most important skill, shooting. Noah is a data service provider that uses machine learning and the latest computer vision technology to provide real-time data and feedback to improve shooting accuracy and consistency for professional and amateur basketball players. Noah has now analyzed over 570 million shots from countless high school, hundreds of college teams, and 28 NBA franchises. The technology is simply amazing. Once the system has been installed, players will be able to get immediate feedback on their shooting arc, left and right positioning, depth, makes or misses, and makes the data available to players and coaches on your mobile device. For more information about how Noah can help your team, visit noahbasketball.com. So excited to have Juli Fulks with us, the head coach of Marshall University Thundering Herd. I'm one of the few people that knows so much about the Thundering Herd and their great tradition. A lot of great coaches have been there on the men's side. Women's side, we've had a few. Your predecessor was pretty good too, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's a neat place. It's a great city. And the people in West Virginia are fabulous. And so I know as an Ohio gal, it's not far. And then spending so much time in Lexington Lexington, Kentucky. It's actually not very far at all. But how have you been adapting to now you're in your second year coming from, Lexington where you spent so much time now over here? How's that been, the transition?
Well, first off, Coach, thanks for having me. I was thrilled when you sent the invitation, and so happy to be included. And really feel blessed. Marshall has been an amazing experience. As you said, we're starting year two, and so it feels like we have our feet under us and a lot of things moving in really fun directions. But I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the people of West Virginia are just awesome, and Huntington as a city loves Marshall and embraces Marshall and cares about Marshall. And our players, everywhere they go, everybody knows who they are. People care about them as people. They care about them and the basketball team. And so I tell everybody, I just want a fan base that really wants us to be successful and cares when it's good or bad. They're behind us.
That's an important thing. You grew up in Ohio and you were playing and everything, but then, you know, on my side, all I wanted to ever be, and I don't mean this, and what I wanted to be, my was to be a high school coach. My high school coach was UB Brown, the great UB Brown, and he was so impactful on my life as a ninth and 10th grader. I said, came home and told my mom, who was a teacher, I said, I want to be like him. I want to go and be a teacher when I get out of college. And she said, well, take your time. You're only ninth, 10th grade, it'll pass. That's what I knew she was saying. It never did. And I knew usually kids have no clue what they want to do when they go to college. Most kids, absolutely now, no fault of theirs, don't have a clue when they get out of college what they want to do. When did you know you wanted to coach?
Yeah, there was always an inkling in the back of my mind, and I wasn't really sure how to get into it. And I had two younger brothers, and probably right or wrong, I made maybe every mistake in the book coaching them. Um, and and so as I was growing up, I had, my first opportunity was in the high school level, and I had graduated. I was a biology major and a psychology minor, and coaching was never in my initial thoughts about what I was going to do. And so I started coaching, and I immediately loved it. And then I had the opportunity to be a graduate assistant for two sports in basketball and softball, and just thought that experience was amazing. And then was hired as a head coach on the West Coast at Lewis and Clark College when I was 26. And to me, it basketball combines my favorite passions, and so I happen to think it's a sport that revolves around science. And sometimes my players probably roll their eyes at how often we bring science and math and analytics into it. But for me, it was I love the competitive side. I love the chess match of the game. How can we outplan? How can we outthink? But then at the end of the day, how can we create this team that understands what the plan is, why it's the plan, and how if we can all come together on the same page, we can have a lot of success.
The biggest thing I think now in college coaching, Julie, is team building,
Yes.
roster construction. Obviously, in the NBA, it's always been that way. But now, as I've always said, I work with a lot of college teams, women and men, and the portal has just tipped many of the coaches, traditional coaches, especially the older ones, totally upside down. They're totally whacked out. Uh, Whereas in the NBA, hey, we know they're professionals. They know there's a draft, there's free agency when your contract's up. It's very organized, collective bargaining agreements to tell you what the players can do. And everything's beautifully laid out. It's run the way professional sports leagues should. But this is like, it's like, going over to your friend's house, the way I described the college situation now, like, and someone says, let's play Monopoly. And you say, yeah, but I got my own rules, and they say, well, that's not the way you play Monopoly, but no, this is the way we play now. And none of it makes any sense. And so I fear because it's like they really don't know what they're doing. And the kids unwittingly, in many ways, are victims because if you just throw money at any young person, they're going to say, okay, it beats working, okay, fine. And especially on the men's side, the women's side, you know, I love that we're NIL. I absolutely love the NIL. The purity of that is incredible. There's no one that I know that's really well educated that begrudges a young person. My daughter was a gymnast. My son was a golfer. I would have loved for them to be able to give a clinic or instruction or have a camp when they were really good. But this thing has gone whacked out, you know. Yeah. Now, at Transylvania,
Yeah,
you're basically the best Division III team in the
yeah,
country. And when you were still there, NIL had come in.
yes.
Any factor there at all?
Yeah, we it was really my last couple years there was when it was really being introduced. And there were so many challenges at every level, and the challenge at Division III especially was NIL would affect financial aid packages. And so we had to be really thoughtful and careful about how you even approached NIL from, what age were there, where were they at in their career, and how might we want to approach that. And then you added all that into, in our last 5 years was the COVID year. Um, and so then figuring out how everybody was going to handle that. And so I think for all of us now, we have been in a land of constant adaptation. And really this is where I'm pretty grateful for my science background, because my brain has always worked in terms of experiments, and we're going to try something, and if it works, great, keep doing it, and if not, change without a lot of emotional reactions to success or failure. And I think right now that's helping a lot, because really I think about every day, and that may be the difference. We used to look at maybe every 6 months or annually what's changed, and now we're just in a constant, every piece of our job, is it working? And if it's not, how can we change it, from the NIL to the rev share to how you schedule affecting NIL and rev share to all of the donor relations. And, there's just every part of how we think about what we're doing, and roster retention. So it's a really unique time. And, I like that you prefaced the past, because I used to have a pretty good idea outside of injuries how long we would be good. You could kind of forecast the future. You know, yeah, yeah, you have this freshman class and you can kind of see. And now, I know what our roster is this year. And, it's probably, I just need to keep learning from people like you that have been in the professional leagues in terms of, changing rosters over and how quickly we flip, the script each year.
Just to give you an example, this is where the lack of thoughtfulness of the I'm not going to point out fingers to the NCAA or anything, but like for instance, working with some pro teams right now on a consulting basis, I literally had a call this morning that one of their best players, they're not getting along with, and I said, well, let's just trade him.
Yeah, yeah.
We can't trade him in college. We can't trade anyone, and if the player is a not too highly priced player or is not on a guaranteed contract, we just cut him. The emotion comes out of it. But all these things, they're not present. They're supposed to be students first. And I wish they were. And so it's just a really difficult time, and it makes it challenging. Coaching's hard enough without these things. And I think the kids now, I'm very concerned about kids that aren't playing for the love of the game. And I think that we're making it very transactional for people at a very young age, where they don't understand life later on becomes very transactional. And as a coach, you're a transformational coach. You're trying to impact your players' lives. And it's so difficult when at your level and above the big conferences, it's the Power Four. It's strictly several things. It's all about money, and I'm from the old school in that everything should be about relationships,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and I'm always interested in how it'll play out, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and all the different things that we're going to learn. When I think about our experiences, and, you're with a group of people for 4 years, and you build and you go through these challenges together, and all of that great stuff. Plus, you're in their weddings and all of those things in the future, and the relationship piece. But then there's the other things, like how are you going to decide future Hall of Fame type things, and who goes in and what teams go in, like the things that you have these long records. And now when somebody comes in and is a freshman and sophomore and sets every record and then leaves,
Leap.
those things.
That's
Um,
I have never thought of that. That makes pure sense. One of the things that I think is really interesting is that, we used to recruit when I coached in college 15 years also. And uh, I remember recruiting kids and I would say, hey, I don't want you to be here for 4 years. I want to be in your life for the next 40,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And that was a big
absolutely.
thing. Absolutely. And now it's like, you know, I've got friends that are coaching still in college, and they said all that 4 years of player development, we're now doing it in 8 months because I don't know
Yeah,
if I'll have them past 8 months, teaching
yeah,
them life lessons.
absolutely.
You have to adapt, and you're a
Yeah.
scientist by nature. So, how have you figured out? And on top of it, women at the age that you're coaching them in college, it's a whole other thing. It's
Yeah.
bad enough older women and young girls, but you're now in that incredible 18 to 23 area, and they're just forming all their ideas and thoughts and stuff like that. It's a difficult age to coach, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and for me, when I look at it, the reason I really like, working with college students is when they start to take their education and their path and their life plan really serious at that age, especially on the women's side. And so I think you can have this really great impact in terms of, when we have young people come in, we always talk to them about what we're going to find out is what are the things that you were naturally really successful at, and what are the things that might be holding you back from reaching your goals. And some of those are on court things, some of those are off court things, some of those are just how they, handle themselves within teamwork framework. And for us, it's going to show up pretty quickly in their journey as to what parts can we really help them move forward. And it's different for all of them. But, all of us, I mean, myself included, we all have these things in our lives that are like, yeah, this is things we're good at. And then I look and I'm like, oh my gosh, these are the things I got to be way better at. And, I can easily pinpoint all, so many of the mistakes and the growth points and the things that, I had to learn from and had catapulted me forward. And so really just trying to do that with them so that, like you said, I mean, I don't know how long I'm going to get to coach each of them, but maybe we can find a way to impact their life heading into the future, not just on the court.
Now, the young women that you had at Transylvania and Lexington, Kentucky, over a 10-year period, you impacted in a huge way. I always dreamt about being on an NBA coaching staff where we had a chance to win more times than we lost. I mean, that's, because you play 82 games and you say, and when you go through those 30, 35, 40 win seasons, that means you're losing 40 plus games a year, half of your games. That's a lot. And now all of a sudden, when I got to the Pistons, all of a sudden I got to see what it was like because I joined the team in January. I came in to coach there, and we lost three of our first four games because our starting guard Joe Dumars got hurt, and we then went 56-10 the the rest of the season, and that includes the playoffs. And when you coach every night and you don't think we're going to lose, it's crazy. So when you're at Transylvania, you did something. It's like John Woodenish. I mean, you go 33-0 in 2023 when you win. You have the best record, men's or women's coach, or men's or women's team, Division 1, 2, or 3 in college basketball, which is freaking awesome. But over a 3-year span, this is the one that got me when I looked this up. 91-2, and you won 64 games in a row. What the hell was that like,
Yeah.
Julie? What was that like?
Well, well, first off, it's credit to the players. The piece for me that was the most interesting was the year that we started that, was, kind of finally coming out of COVID. And the year before we had a pretty big graduation in terms of lots of seniors who had lots of experience. And so this group came in and they were juniors who obviously had played, and two of them had started, but none of them really had been the person when we were in the game. And so I always think as a coach, that's the most nervous part is when you hit crunch time, who's going to step up and how are they going to handle that? And so that's where we started that 3 year stretch. Um, and that year happened to include, I don't remember anymore, 5 or 6 top 25 teams. And, sometimes I'm a big believer in how things play out. That was the year before was the year that we switched to playing zone. And that was during COVID. And we switched to zone that year. One, I never thought we were going to finish the season. And I had always wanted to just try. What would it be like if we played zone all year and we happened to be physically really big? That was one of our probably things everybody's known for at Transylvania when we were there. We were just physically big. We had a lot of 6'2", 6'3" players. Um, and so we decided it was a good year to go zone because we didn't know who would be in or who would be out. But maybe we could always have, yes, yes, from the COVID. This was still when everybody was being quarantined. Um, and so we just decided let's do this. That way we at least always have a defensive plan. We may not have an offensive plan, but we'll always have a defensive plan. And we went the entire year playing zone, and lo and behold, we did have the season. We got to the conference tournament, and it was a blind draw for seeding because we had not played a balanced schedule. And so we were a little bit of a lower seed, and that was fine. And so we had to go on the road for our first game, which we hadn't done in a while. And I will never forget this. The other team happened to come out and hit 4 or 5 mid-range shots in a row. And I looked and said, experiment over. We're going back to man. And we played man the rest of the conference tournament. uh, yep. And that was the end of the experiment. We played the rest of the conference tournament and man, won the conference tournament. And I thought that was really fun. Um, and so then we graduated a group of pretty strong women that won 3 straight conference tournaments. And so we went into the next year, and I'm like, okay, back to what we used to do, and majority man, and we just randomly had some players that were having some off the court issues. We had a young lady whose her dad and grandfather had passed away from COVID, and so we kind of ended up in this unique spot heading into the beginning of the season where we didn't know how many of our starters we were going to have for a couple games. And we played our last scrimmage, and it did not start well. I laugh because we had a couple that maybe were not yet good man-to-man defenders. And so we went into the first game not knowing, and I said, fine, let's just play zone again until we figure it out. And our second game of the year, we went out and played Tufts, who was number 2 in the country. We were missing our starter, who had unfortunately lost her dad that week. And we're like, okay, let's stick to zone. And we end up winning again. And now I'm like, okay, well, I may not be the smartest, but we're just going to keep doing this. And that was really how it all started. And we just kept trying to fix it and adjust and fix and adjust. And we ended up going 27-1 that year. And we graduated one. And, at least I was smart enough to keep doing the same thing after that.
Explain to our listeners, and I saw the incredible clinic that you put on in Columbus, Ohio for the Ohio High School Coaches Association. I was mesmerized because my whole career coached man to man, but I learned several years ago I had a really young team, and they were the worst defensive team I've ever seen in college. And we went, and the coach that I was working with, he also was a man to man coach. And we just basically said, well, we got to play zone. And it turned out we did okay. But if we didn't, we would have been horrific. So explain to the listeners, if you would, Julie, the kind of zone it is, and describe, if you could, some of the rules and nuances of it.
Well, one of the things that we had to start figuring out and asking ourselves sincerely was, why is this working? Like we had all of our ideas of what makes a great man-to-man team, and whether you're, pressuring or playing the gaps, and, all of those philosophies. We started realizing people were struggling to score. We ended up being the number 1 defense in the country. And I think the last year we never had anybody score over 50 points. I mean, it was something crazy. Um, and and so all the time we were trying to figure out, okay, what is making this special and unique? And really there were some things in terms of how it started. Syracuse men played a very similar start to how we started in Notre Dame women. And I can't take the credit. One of my, Tim Weitzel, who's been with me for a long time, he had done a lot of the research, and that was our starting point. But then we really just kept trying to figure out what are the questions that we're trying to answer. And the biggest one initially was everybody's going to attack it through the high post. And so figuring out for us what that meant in terms of how are we going to guard that, because this is the base set. And to go back to kind of the earlier thing in terms of why it works. One, it always allows us to have a rim protector. And, obviously WNBA, NBA, when they had the defensive 3 seconds a long time ago, my understanding of that was always because the game would be less exciting if there was somebody always protecting the rim.
Take out the drive.
Yes.
That's what they felt. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, conversely, this allows us to always keep the rim protected and protected with a big body. So for that was kind of step one. We always have the rim protected. And two, I felt like it really allowed us to guard the 3-point line. And, the same thing, the game has advanced to people shooting a lot of threes. I think over the last 6 years, Marshall to Transylvania, we averaged 25 to 33s a game on offense. And so it allowed us to protect the rim. It allowed us to protect the 3-point line. And, we were giving up, whether maybe not initially on purpose, but we were giving up, now the least efficient shot in basketball as a mid-range. And so I think that was the starting point. But then we realized, if we were giving up the right shots, we were also always in rebounding position. And that was the piece I thought at Transylvania, we happened to have a great group of rebounders on both ends. Really athletic, great at seeking out the ball. And so that was kind of the tipping point of, on top of taking away the rim and defending the 3-point line, when teams did miss, we were in position. We typically had inside position. And so, we were able to do a great job at cleaning up the boards. And, I think it's really interesting now. I think for a long time, we have always looked at shot selection plus rebounding percentage, and that I think is now just finally really starting in the last couple of years for people to think about not just what is your ability to shoot and make this shot, but what is your ability to rebound misses. And, for about 15 years now, we've sent everybody to the offensive boards. And that only started because I coached against somebody who sent everybody to the offensive boards and we could never stop them. And I was like, that seems like a good idea. And so that, that's really where it came from. And then as we got more efficient at teaching, and really, from my experience now, it's the bottom, we call them the forwards, but the bottoms outsides of the 2-3. When we got great at teaching their footwork, that was when it really kind of took a next level in terms of understanding, what their coverage was. And typically, obviously, they're getting a bump on the other side from, the wing to either the corner or the short corner. And when we had started working on that footwork and perfecting that footwork, and so they were always pushing with the top foot and immediately, and if they made the ball go over them, they were able to get the cover. And, so it was a pieces of, understanding what we were trying to take away. And then, as we move forward, I thought the other piece that was great is, I would argue probably historically we get everybody's second or third best offense, because most people don't spend all year working on a zone offense. And so you come into a game and we get your second or third offense. You can't make us stand anywhere we don't want to stand. You can't take the big out from under the rim. Outside of the middle of our zone, it protects us from fouling in a lot of ways. And so if I have players I don't want in foul trouble, outside of the middle of the zone, I can protect them from foul troubles. And the scouting becomes much easier because, kind of every, both levels that I've been at, people typically attack it the same way. And so for our players, this past season in the Sun Belt, we went to a new conference tournament model. So we played 5 games in 5 days. And by that, it was crazy. But by that point, our game prep was so simple in the fact that they're going to attack it, out of the high post, short corner. They're going to spread us out and set a ball screen on this side to try to overload that side. And so it was much less about how they're going to do it. And like, these are the people we're going to take away. So this is our focus of their personnel versus us included. We have, an endless offensive set for man to man and all the ways that I want to attack you based on this. And I have 4 zone offenses, and that's the end of it.
No, and that's why, I look back. I've always been 60 to 80 off man-to-man plays.
Yeah.
60 to 80. And and if you're a super zone offensive coach, you might have 5.
Yes.
You might. There's some that have 2.
Yeah.
And you know what? You don't even have to scout. You can self-scout as the game starts, right? To see how they play
Yes.
against your zone,
Yeah.
right? And now if they're hurting you doing something, the first media timeout, you can adjust.
Yeah.
It's such an advantage, I think.
Yeah.
Plus, I would think also, I find that coaches play slower against zones
I
against you.
completely agree. I
Yeah.
completely agree.
And so I think that's a huge advantage. I think it also can protect you for foul trouble that, against, because I'm going to say it, you're not. The officiating at the men's and college level is awful, and the WNBA is awful, and the players though are really good. But I don't want with 5 fouls my best inside player to get in foul trouble because of some poor call. And so I think this is huge. I think it's one of the things, and I don't know on the women's side as much. On the men's side, we're seeing between 90 and 95% of teams play man-to-man exclusively. I
Yes.
cannot understand it.
Yeah. Well, and I'm always glad when we play somebody and everybody they've played has played them man to man, because it inevitably takes some while to adjust. And the thing I've come to realize, even me, like last year was a great test for me in terms of here is a new group to teach it to. And so how long does it really take for a group of new players to learn? And in fairness, we were not very good at it last year at the beginning of the season. But by the end, we were averaging 11 steals a game. And I think it's one of the things that they like about it is outside of getting the middle, it's really motivating to get a steal because it's almost always a breakaway. If the basic, if whatever steal that they are getting that works into their spot, if they come up with it, there's never anybody between them and the rim. And so it allows them to be extra aggressive because we all know they are internally motivated, to get a few extra points.
Julie, when you go in, let's say, to Marshall, or if when you go in to teach it, whether it be at Transylvania or Marshall, is the alignment always the same, or do you adjust it based on the other team's offense, or how does that work?
Yeah. I think my biggest mistake sometimes is when we over prep a little bit, because what I've learned is they don't fly around nearly as fast and aggressively when they've prepped. And when it's at its best, they are just sticking to core principles. And when we're teaching, the only question, they'll ask me a question and my response always is, where was the ball? Because all of their positioning is just based on where the ball is. And so here's your primary, and then you only have usually one other cover that you have to worry about. And, from a teaching standpoint, that's where I think we are often at our best. And we have tried, we have 5 zone offenses, but really what we've tried to do is just mimic what we will see. And so, that just eliminates scouts again. Hey, this is how we're going to spread us out. This is how we're going to set a ball screen and overload it. Mikasa Robinson, now Lucas, she came from Louisville, and I think he's a great X's and O's coach. So we took one set that they ran that we thought was pretty hard to guard, and so we've tried to make sure on offense we do the things that are hard to guard now, and so those are just some of the things that I've learned over time, and now we're pretty good at some of the things that we used to really cause us problems. And so I still know the things that cause us problems, and there's 1 or 2 that I think are really hard to guard, and so we actually don't run those because I don't want to give anybody any ideas. And I laugh because the hardest team usually for us to get stops on is ourselves, because they know the strengths and they know the weak points, and they're pretty good at learning over the course of their time how to attack it, which just makes us better.
My observation when I was a college coach, what days of the week do the women in the Sun Belt play?
We go Wednesday or Thursday. There's some flex based on distance, and then every Saturday.
Saturday?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And you do it if you're at home, men are on the road type of
Yes.
thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So SEC, for instance, where I live, they play Thursday, Sundays mostly, and the men play Wednesday, Saturdays mostly. And so what I found is there's 2 days of prep every week for each game. And I think coaches so overcoach worrying about the other team and not worrying about themselves. And I think if I was playing against you, I would be petrified for the 2 days I have. And all I would be doing is working on that. And then what I'm not doing is worrying about what we should do just, in our game. And I think that in itself is a great reason to do what you're doing because you got them to devote time to what you really want them to. That's just,
And then I will counter to the flip side of that. Once we get the zone in and established, it doesn't take us more than really probably 15 to 18 minutes a day to just keep everything fresh in their head. And so then where they end up loving it is that means we're now spending an hour and a half a day on offense.
and you're playing
Um,
against man most
yep, and
times,
we're going
right?
man to man, and obviously we have male practice players, and we still have, we have two players on staff that played for me and at Mikasa, so we have some pretty talented players plus our male practice players, um, and so it's
I think that's,
great
excuse
that we
me,
get to work on offense.
I think that is one of the damn best things I've seen. I was at an SEC team last week, women's team, and their male practice players were fantastic. I'm saying like they could play for the men's team here. That's how good they looked. And I'm saying these poor gals are going to get their butt kicked, and they destroyed these guys, and I was shocked. And the guys were really good players, and they're great guys. And I thought they would ease up on them. These girls, they were so physical and hit. I walked away, and I was so stunned by it. But I think that's one of the really neat things and I don't mean this in a bad way. I mean in a complimentary to elevate the game because they're going against really, really good players, and you don't have to worry about sometimes when you scrimmage your own people, they hurt each other.
Yeah, absolutely. My biggest concern is we have always been unbelievably aggressive on the boards. But what you have to remember is that means everything we do is a collision. Everything. And so when we are doing small group rebounding, when we do rebounding, we tend to do it in small groups to at least increase the amount of court space so that there's less chance of somebody getting tangled up.
I've never heard
And
that before. That's great.
yeah, but it's one of the perks, with the poor men. One of the perks is we have this group of men, and something that I think has helped us tremendously in terms of our rebounding is we start everything with the orange cone in. So everybody has kind of their version of whatever they put in the rim, and so our group of men always start on offense, and we start on defense in the zone. And so you can't even get to offense until you get a rebounder. And we have a 6'5" guy there because we play lots of people that are 6'5". Our starting game was 5, um, and so our rebounding habits I think are really good for this time of year. But it's partly because they literally can't go to offense until they get a rebound. So they have to start, every possession we go and we start with the cone in, and you have to get the rebound, and then they get to play offense, and then they have to finish with a rebound to get off the court. And for us, it helps them understand we want everything to get out and transition and go. And if the zone is great, and if we don't give up wing threes, because that's really the only shot. I mean, our first rule is wing threes are really hard to rebound because typically you have the bottom and top going. And so you're 5-on-4. And so we'd always, my first question is, how do we get this rebound? And the rule is don't give up the shot. And if we don't give up the shot, we don't have to figure that out. But we work on that rep all the time because that's harder said than done.
So
Um,
is that swinging the ball from, let's say, the right side to the top to the left?
yeah, and there's different ways it gets there. It should never, for us, we don't believe it ever should get there on a skip. But typically it's a pretty savvy high post, somebody from the high post who really understands and as a team really understands where everybody's moving after some movement. So we're pretty good at taking that away, mostly because, I mean, we work on that all the time on taking that away. That is, drill number 3 of every practice is rebounding, whether it's out of shell or out of the zone. I mean, and so we rep that every day. And then when we are playing live, um, we're pretty particular about not giving up a three. And so it's great for that, where at the end of the day, last year, when we struggled at the beginning of the year, we were getting the stops and we could not come up with a rebound. We were small and we just couldn't find the rebound. And that was the biggest change over the course of the year was we finally cleaned up the boards, and some of that was just getting people back from injuries, and we started averaging 10 and 11 steals, and then it all came together. But it did take us a little bit.
So I was going to ask you before about when you play a zone majority of the time, did you did you worry about having a complementary offense? Because when you didn't get you don't when you're at Transylvania, you don't give up any points. So a dear older friend of mine, Eric Musselman's daddy, Bill Musselman, Ashland College, 33.9 points a game he gave up with his ball defense, but he held the ball on offense. God
Yeah.
bless you, Bill. I'm
Yep.
sorry,
Yep.
but but you're running.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're not trying to play slow, use the shot
We are
clock.
not.
You're doing the opposite. Yeah.
And I think one of the things again that can sometimes make it easy is when we tend to get a rebound, we know where everybody's going to be on the court. And, so it makes it much easier. We have a really athletic two guard. Both places I've been, we just have a really athletic two that can get out. Well, it always keeps them at the top. And so now when we get a rebound, we've already given them an advantage because wherever the shot goes up, they're at the top. And so, it allows us to be really aggressive in some of those ways because we know when a rebound comes off where everybody's already standing. And that for us is a huge advantage on misses because we're already in lanes. It's already set up for us to be in lanes in terms of where our one starts and our two and what side they're on. And so it helps us get out in early transition because we can already plan. And that's part of our, when we have the orange cone in, if the, what would be considered traditionally, if our offensive three gets it, this is where we're going. And if the five gets it in the middle, this is where we're going. And if the four gets it on the other side, this is how we attack. And that makes it easier to get out faster, I think.
It makes so much sense. In the Sun Belt, which is a large conference, number of teams, how many teams primary defense on the women's side of zone?
Gosh, we're probably the only true
Yeah,
primary.
yeah, and
Yeah,
then the men's side possibly none. You know, and Boeheim for he didn't last long, probably 50 years, played only zone. And the funny thing about Jim is just like that you mentioned, Julie, is that every now and then they got behind in the game. He had so many great teams, but he got behind. Then he would go man to man, and their man to man was really good because they played against man to man every day in practice.
yes, yep.
And so Jim, you know how he is. He would just go, he talks, he's whining all the time, and we never teach man to man, but you play it every day. You might not give them any rules, which might be better actually. And they played very aggressively, and they were behind, and they were really good. Uh, so if you do have to go man to man, it's really, I bet, effective because they probably haven't practiced man to man, and certainly you put them to sleep possibly during the game of running.
Yeah. Well, we got drove to man a couple games last year. Two of the 31 games, or I guess 33 by the end of it. We got drove to man. And we understood why, and it happened to also be a team that was just shooting the lights out that, you know, was fast and getting out in transition and was really natural at 5 out in transition. And so didn't really have a true post player on the floor. And, it was really unique because really we just were aggressive to go get the ball. We knew we weren't going to be good we switched everything and we're not going to be great at help rotations. And so rather than be passive and get beat on a drive anyway because we couldn't rotate, ours like just go get it. Just go get it. But I have to be full disclosure. We did our first man-to-man drill 2 days ago in practice, and I was like, wow, this is the first time I have done a man-to-man drill for in probably 5 years. We think we have a group that might be pretty good at switching stuff, and we're like, well, let's at least give you a couple rule sets to make it easier.
I think that's great. And I think I love the way you think out of the box. And I think that is so important nowadays because the one thing we know about young people is they get bored very easily. And so you have to, I think, have to figure out ways to challenge them and incentivize them. And I know one thing watching college players and pro players, they do not understand now drills. They don't understand the importance of why do I need to do drills. They can't do the transfer of learning that we talk about in education. Why does drill makes? What do we need this in the game for? This 3-man drill. I don't get it. And so that's why I'm so big on 5-on-5 basketball and playing it. And I think you can't play a zone with practicing it with two people. I mean, I'm sure you have drills that you could and 3-man, but it really works when all 5 players are doing their assignment. Uh, the thing that fascinates me about you, you have your PhD in education. I mean, in leadership. I think probably that is is the most important thing a head coach must have nowadays is leadership. And I love that your thing is you have your culture is based on serving. If you would share, if you would, some of your ideas on leadership and on how you coach and build a culture anywhere you are.
Yeah, I think like all of us, everything evolves as you go, and for me, I was always really curious about the why, and still am. I think, I just anything that happens, I'm really curious about why it happens, whether it's, I was a biology major and you're looking at, how the world works in terms of the science, for me, how a team comes together and, the math of it. But really, I got really interested early on in why teams work. And, I think there were a couple really instrumental books early in my career. And one of them was Good to Great because it was the first time I had seen anybody put math to leadership. And that really struck me. And at the same time, the book Moneyball came out. And, long before the movie. And I think Moneyball was the first book that gave me what I felt was like a little bit of permission to try things that were not normal. And, and so those two things combined. And really, I wanted to know why great teams worked. And my PhD, the dissertation, it was about leadership communication, and neuroscience. Um, and so the neuroscience really was, when you're communicating to a group, what really does make it effective in terms of your brain, and so why does our brain enjoy talking to somebody? What makes them responsive to leadership? And that was what I was really curious about. And then finding ways to implement it in our team. And probably, not probably, one of the ways that I ended up at Marshall was I was really fortunate. Nate Oates at Alabama invited me down to talk at his clinic about trust and teamwork. Because as you mentioned earlier, teams were turning over quickly. And so how quickly could we build trust within a team? Because we've all found out that's the foundation to all great teams. And, so for me, but if trust is the bottom level of everything, starting to build that with our players was really starting to, serve them and figure out how could we help them? How could we help move their lives forward? And not just on the court, how could we help them in the classroom? How could we help them with external things that they have going on so that they understood we cared about them as a person, not if you can score 20 for me, then I'm going to care about you. And while it's still transactional or becoming transactional in a lot of ways, for me, the part of the job I really love is that piece where basketball is a great motivator for them to help figure out how and what they want to change in their lives. And then on top of that, even more importantly, you have to, I think, chase championships because that is what really separates them from going all in on something. It's easy to show up to practice and just get through the drill. Like it's 2 hours, practice is going to pass. It's much different to show up and be fully engaged in the process. And, you mentioned earlier that team that won 64 in a row. And to me, their greatest strength outside of they're just competitiveness, but they bought in every day in terms of the showing up. And so they practiced at a level that would win 90% of the games we played. And so that was the baseline level. Um, and that was the piece that when I've tried to explain to people, what I thought the most remarkable thing of that was the national championship was great, but the fact that they went 2 calendar years without having an off night with when somebody had the flu, all the things that happen, they had done everything at such a level, they were still able to win. And, that was a huge, I thought, just credit to them on top of winning all that games was just that streak of excellence that they chased really every day in practice.
When trust is the highest form of human currency, I say, and if you lose it, you're done. So, how do you develop with new team? Uh, how do you develop not just but the relationships, which is the cornerstone of gaining trust? How do you go about it?
For us, with this year, so we started and, the new team comes together in June every year. And we use this year The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, which is a book I've used multiple times. And the reason we start there is it starts with trust being such a cornerstone. And, for me, talking about it helps them understand it because, everybody comes in with their own trust level based on their background. And, some of them are pretty open to trusting right away. Some of them have no interest in trusting until you prove yourself over and over and over again. And I understand all that. I'm the first to say everybody has defense mechanisms for a reason. And, so we try to spend a lot of time at the beginning with just getting to know who they are as people. And that's group conversations. It's just, talking to them one on one and trying to make sure most of those conversations are not just always basketball. And, for me, academics is an easy starting point. I actually thought one of the hardest things about coming to Marshall is obviously the academics is removed from me. We have an amazing academic advisor, but I always loved the academic piece because that was the part that I could meet with our players each week. And, I already established I'm a bit of a nerd. And, that gave me the chance that, okay, so we're talking about, history class or whatever. And then we could talk about basketball. And so that let them have some sort of relationship and understanding before we ever had to get to the hard part. And, we're all at the beginning of the year right now. And so as you go into games and roles are established, that obviously always causes a little bit of tension and friction that, because everybody wants to play and they want to, they want to contribute. And so I think every coach at this time of year has got to work through that with their group. And, but we hopefully at this point we are well established and in our relationship so they can at least come talk to us about it.
Yeah, I'm big on. I listen to. I'm always trying to learn, and the people I listen to are non-basketball people like Brene Brown, being vulnerable and stuff. And men, they don't want to be vulnerable. I think women have much better time with that sometimes, sometimes, but men, oh no, we're tough, and I just think if you can dig down and find out so much about people, I've always said, Julie, that I've coached basketball now 55 years, but I've never coached basketball. I coach people. That has nothing to do with basketball. And I think that's the part that I'm worried about with this becoming transactional business with, you're, as long as you're here, you're good for me. If you're not, then my thing is about relationships with people that I've coached. Some of my best friends are players I've coached 35 years ago.
Yeah.
One of them just called during our podcast for the third time today.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. NBA. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that because we are brothers and,
Yeah.
and he's black and I'm white. But we are total brothers, and
Yeah.
that's the relationship, the impact, and that's why I think coaching is so the most powerful thing, probably outside of being someone's mom or dad, is that you're the most impactful person they possibly might ever have in their life, and you
Yeah.
love that responsibility, don't you?
Yeah. And, and it doesn't mean you're always going to get it right. And
Oh
so,
no, none of us do, right?
yeah, there's plenty of times you have to say, hey, I'm sorry, I messed that up. And, and sincerely learn and grow from it. And, I think about where I started to now and all the lessons I learned along the way. And,
Can't recognize yourself, right?
yeah, honestly, no. And it's sometimes good because, there's plenty of things that, I wish I'd have done different. And,
Sure.
And so some of the things that now we talk about is, like, hey, we're going to all make a bunch of decisions. And, if we can always assume that we're all doing it from the right place, when we do mess up, we can give some grace because, it's impossible for us to all play a competitive game every day in practice and in real games and not get it wrong sometimes. There's too many emotions going. We're all imperfect people. And, what I loved is, this book that we use this year is kind of their second edition. And the part that I really enjoyed and had them read the prologue twice is it talks about, great teams are hard because they're made up of imperfect people. And sometimes you have members of a team who you mentioned earlier in terms of, keeping or trading. Sometimes you have a member of a team who is actually not interested in being a part of a great team. And no matter what you do, and no matter how many of these lessons you hit, if they're not interested in being a part of a great team, you might not be able to be a great team. And so that really hit me hard because, there are two parts of being great teams. It's one, having the talent and trust and leadership and all that, but two, it's everybody choosing to be a part of a great team. And that's an active choice.
Boy, Good to Great is one of my favorites. My coaching partner, Chuck Daly, before he passed away, called me one day, living down in Jupiter, Florida, and he said, "I got a coaching book for you to read." I said, "Okay, what is it?" "No, he's retired." And I'm saying, "You got a coaching book. Now you're worried about coaching books. You're retired." And he says, "It's Good to Great." I said, "Chuck, that's a business book." He said, "Every book I read is a coaching book." I applied it to coach. It is so good. But Julie, the thing I want to tell you is that in Good to Great, you know all the things that are important here: getting the right people on the bus, putting them in the right seats on the bus, getting the wrong people off the bus, get those energy vampires off. Make sure that you have a good driver
Yes,
on
absolutely.
the bus. And I added my own. I didn't ask Jim Collins for this permission, but I said, "Well, you better hope that the driver knows where to go."
Yes.
And you, my friend, know where to go. You are unbelievable. And when I saw you in September in Columbus, I said, wow. I knew about your background. But I said, to hear you talk, to hear your expertise, the way you coaching is teaching, and you are a master coach. And I just love that. And a master coach can coach anyone, men, women, anyone. You're a coach. And it's so, when I see people like this, it excites the hell out of me, to be honest with you, because we need this so much because of the impact you can make on young women or any player that you coach. I bet those guys that are your practice players, they become pretty damn good by you coaching them and your staff. And so I think it's great. Your leadership things are off the charts. I wish you and the Thundering Herd incredible luck this year. And it's such an honor to get to know you this past few months. And I'm looking forward to a long relationship where I just love what you can do for the game. And you are a shining star now, and I appreciate it so much.
Well, Coach, that was very complimentary. So thank you. But I appreciate everything you've done and having me on today. And I would love to do a reverse podcast where I just got to ask you questions for a few hours. So we got to figure that out in the future where I just get to, talk to you about your life and career and all the things you've got.
You can do that anytime you want, but we're not going to podcast. You can do it in a personal call anytime you want, or a Zoom call anytime you want. I'll be there for you. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.